Her whisper froze me to the spot. "Grandpa, Mom, and Dad will steal your money tonight." Those were the exact words my 9-year-old granddaughter Sophie murmured into my ear during her birthday party, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift. I forced a smile for the guests, excused myself early, and drove home with a storm brewing inside my chest. For years, I had believed my son Brian and his wife Clara only wanted help for their daughter's future. But now, I saw the trap closing around me. They had underestimated the man who built everything from nothing. What I did next turned their plan upside down and left the entire family in disbelief. Before we go deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own son and daughter-in-law tried to steal everything you worked for? The morning of Sophie's 9th birthday began with a phone call that carried an uneasiness I could not ignore. My son Brian's voice came through the line thin and strained, the way it had sounded years ago when he admitted to denting my old truck in high school. It was 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, a time he rarely called, and before I even answered, I sensed the conversation would not be about cake or balloons. "Dad, are you up? I wanted to remind you about Sophie's party today," he said, his words tumbling over themselves like a salesman trying to sound casual while closing a deal. I sipped my coffee and stared at the light cutting through the blinds. "Brian, when have I ever missed my granddaughter's birthday?" I asked, setting the mug down before it slipped from my hands. He stammered, filling the silence with an awkward laugh that sounded more mechanical than amused. "No, I know, Dad. It's just that Clara really wants you there early, around 1:30. We have some family things to talk about before the guests arrive." That phrase, family things, settled heavily in my stomach. In 3 years since Margaret passed, Brian and Clara had never asked me to sit down for a private talk before a party. As he spoke, I could hear Clara's voice in the background, clipped and insistent, instructing him on what to say. That was nothing new. She had always been the orchestrator, the one who smiled for the neighbors, but watched everything with the sharp eyes of a hawk. "Clara just wants to make sure you do not forget," Brian added, softer this time. "She has been planning this for weeks." That alone gave me pause. Clara's idea of planning usually meant ordering cupcakes the night before, or delegating chores to Sophie while she scrolled her phone. For her to suddenly be invested in streamers and candles felt as out of place as Brian's early call. I agreed to come early, though my voice carried none of the suspicion I felt inside. I had learned in business that a man reveals more by listening quietly than by showing his hand too soon. After the call, I sat with my untouched coffee, staring at Sophie's latest crayon drawing pinned to the refrigerator. She had sketched a lopsided house with stick figures labeled Grandpa, Daddy, Mommy, and Me in purple marker. Her innocence shone through every crooked line. Yet something in that picture hit me differently now. Margaret's last words came back like a whisper from the grave. "Promise me you will always look after Sophie. But watch Brian carefully. He is weak, Edward, and weak men make dangerous choices when someone stronger is pulling the strings." At the time, I thought she meant his drinking buddies, or his habit of chasing get-rich-quick schemes. Now, hearing Clara's voice nudging him through the phone, I realized she might have seen something far more dangerous in her daughter-in-law's ambition than I had been willing to admit. I finished my coffee slowly, the silence of the house pressing on me in a way that felt different than usual. Ever since Margaret's passing, mornings had been quiet. But this was not peace. It was a warning. I could feel it. My gut, trained through 40 years of building a construction company brick by brick, told me that today was not about balloons and cake. Today was about control. and as much as I wanted to believe my son would never betray me, I could not shake the feeling that I was walking straight into a trap. That afternoon, as I buttoned a shirt from the closet Margaret once organized with her neat touch, I thought about everything I had poured into Brian's family. $65,000 in 3 years, mortgage payments when they fell behind, car repairs when his old sedan broke down, tuition fees so Sophie could attend a private school Clara insisted was necessary for her future. Each request had been served with Brian's embarrassed explanations and Clara's carefully timed gratitude. I had told myself I was helping them stand tall. But maybe all I had done was train them to lean harder. Still, the thought of Sophie's smile waiting for me pulled me forward. She was the one light that never dimmed. The one reason I kept forgiving, kept giving. By 1:30, I would be at their door, gifts in hand, smile fixed in place. I would act the part of the proud grandfather. Yet behind that mask, I would be listening carefully, waiting for the first slip, the first crack that revealed what Margaret had warned me about. Driving toward Brian's house that morning, I could not help replaying the countless ways I had carried his burden since Margaret's passing. Every month brought a new request, dressed in the clothes of necessity but stitched together with manipulation. The first was the mortgage, and I remember Brian's voice trembling when he told me the bank was sending letters. I paid it without hesitation, because Sophie did not deserve the fear of losing her home. The second came when his car broke down, and somehow an urgent transmission repair ballooned into a full engine rebuild. I signed that check as well, convincing myself it was for his safety on the road. Then came Clara's soft voice about grocery money, just until things got better. That temporary plea turned into a regular expectation, and by the time I added tuition fees for Sophie's school, I realized I had funneled over $65,000 into keeping their household afloat. Margaret's practical wisdom would have called it excessive. But when I looked into Sophie's eyes, I convinced myself there was no such thing as too much. As I dressed for the party, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The shirt I buttoned was one Margaret had folded neatly years ago, its crispness dulled by time. It reminded me of her funeral, when Clara stood at the graveside murmuring about how large the house was for one man. Even in grief, she had measured the walls and countertops with her eyes like a realtor scouting her next commission. Brian quickly shifted the conversation then, but Clara's gaze had lingered on my granite counters and polished wood floors. At the time, I forced myself to believe she was making nervous small talk. Now, after this morning's phone call, I wondered if her mind had been plotting far beyond sympathy even then. I stopped at Riverside Plaza on the way to their house to pick up gifts for Sophie. The Lego architecture section called to me immediately, just as it had weeks earlier when Sophie came home chattering about her class trip to the art museum. She had fallen in love with buildings, sketching bridges and towers with crayons as if her little hands were laying the blueprints of her future. My eyes settled on the Eiffel Tower set. It was detailed enough to challenge her curiosity, something she could build and rebuild. And when I saw the price tag of $175, I did not hesitate. I wanted her to have a gift that sparked her imagination. From there, I bought a proper bicycle, a sleek silver model with sturdy handbrakes and reflective strips. $300 felt like a bargain for the smile I imagined on her face when she saw it. Finally, I added a bouquet of orchids for Clara. Margaret had loved orchids, and though the irony was bitter, I knew Clara would recognize the gesture as respect for the hostess. By the time I loaded everything into my Cadillac, I had spent nearly $600, and it struck me that this too had become routine, spending freely for Sophie's happiness while Clara quietly calculated the value of my generosity. As I closed the trunk, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Edward, what a surprise." It was Mrs. Caldwell, my neighbor of nearly 2 decades, her silver hair tucked neatly into a scarf. She carried a shopping bag from the bookstore and smiled warmly. "Out shopping so early?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Sophie's birthday today." Needed a few things. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes lit up. Of course. I saw Brian and Clara downtown just last Tuesday, coming out of First National Bank. Looked like they had their hands full of papers. Important business, I imagine. Her words landed on me like a stone in deep water. Tuesday. The same week, Brian insisted I come early to discuss family matters. I asked casually, "You are sure it was Tuesday?" She chuckled. "Positive." I was picking up a novel, and there they were. Very serious faces, very official. I thanked her and excused myself. But as I slid into the driver's seat, my mind began connecting the dots. Brian and Clara at the bank, paperwork in hand. The sudden insistence that I attend early. The background whispers from Clara during this morning's call. A nervous son and a daughter-in-law who had always looked at my house as if it were already theirs. None of it felt like coincidence. My instincts, honed through decades of contracts and negotiations, told me something was being arranged, and it was not a birthday surprise. The Cadillac hummed as I steered toward their house, the gifts stacked neatly in the back. Sophie's birthday should have been a day of joy. But as I drove, my thoughts swirled with Margaret's warning. Weak men make dangerous choices when someone stronger whispers in their ear. Clara had been whispering for years, and Brian had been leaning on me longer than I wanted to admit. What remained to be seen was whether today's whispers would finally turn into something irreversible. The thought pressed heavier with every mile, and by the time I pulled into their driveway, I knew this party was not just a celebration, but the beginning of a battle I could no longer ignore. As soon as I stepped from the car with Sophie's wrapped gifts in hand, Clara swept to the door with a smile too wide, too rehearsed. "Edward, you made it," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that I had rarely heard directed at me. She touched my arm as though we were old friends, her eyes darting to the bicycle box I struggled with. "How thoughtful," she said quickly, her words polished like a sales pitch. I knew Clara's polite mask well enough to see when she had polished it for an audience. The house was decorated far beyond what I had expected. Streamers hung from every doorway, balloons clustered in corners, the table groaned under platters of food that clearly cost more than a week's worth of groceries. Clara never put this kind of effort into parties before. She was performing, and she wanted me to notice. Brian appeared behind her, his voice booming unnaturally. "Dad!" There he is, the man of the hour. He clapped me on the shoulder as if we were business partners meeting clients. Then he turned to a man by the fireplace. "This is my father, Edward." "I have told you how much I admire him," the man, a co-worker named Mike, looked politely confused as Brian went on about my supposed wisdom and leadership. In truth, Brian had spent most of his adult life dismissing my old-fashioned ways. His sudden praise was not affection. It was strategy. I let them parade me through the living room, shaking hands and listening to Brian's glowing introductions. But in between the laughter and music, I caught the exchanges that mattered. Brian and Clara shared quick glances, the kind married couples used when playing a private game. Every time the conversation drifted near finances or my house, one of them jumped in with a joke or diversion. They were managing the flow, keeping me distracted while ensuring no one else caught the undercurrent of tension. My instincts sharpened with every passing moment, but I kept my smile steady, playing the role of the proud grandfather. Then I saw Sophie. She ran across the room with her arms outstretched, her hair bouncing, her smile as genuine as the morning sun. "Grandpa," she cried, wrapping herself around my waist. For a moment, everything else faded, and I bent down to hand her the first gift. She opened the bag slowly, her little fingers tracing the picture on the Lego Eiffel Tower box. Her eyes widened, but instead of the pure delight I expected, I saw something flicker, relief mixed with worry. She looked up at me quickly, then glanced toward her parents, as if afraid they might disapprove of her joy. Clara stepped in at once, her tone light but sharp. "Isn't Grandpa generous, Sophie?" "Say thank you properly," Sophie whispered the words, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. That shadow in her expression told me more than any party chatter. My granddaughter was carrying a secret. I tried to settle into the celebration, sipping the wine Clara poured too eagerly, listening to the chatter of neighbors and old friends. Yet everywhere I looked, the play continued. Clara hovering too close, refilling my glass before I asked. Brian laughing too loud, praising me too often. Even Sophie moved like an actress forced into a role, smiling at her friends while her shoulders sagged under something heavier. Mrs. Smith, a longtime neighbor sitting on the couch, leaned toward me. "Such a thoughtful child," she murmured. "She asked me just last week if grandparents and parents ever disagree about important decisions." I turned my head slowly, meeting Mrs. Smith's eyes. "What did you tell her?" She smiled kindly. That families always work through things with love and honesty. I nodded, but my chest tightened. Sophie was asking questions a child her age should not have to ask. As the afternoon wore on and guests began drifting toward the door, Brian approached me with an overly casual smile. "Dad, hang back after everyone leaves, all right? Clara and I really want to talk about some family matters." His tone was practiced, the way a man sells a deal already signed. I forced a nod, though inside I braced for the confrontation Margaret had warned me about. I excused myself, mentioning the bathroom down the hallway. Clara jumped up instantly, eager to point the way. Though I knew perfectly well where it was, her urgency was not about directions. It was about control. Walking down the hall lined with family pictures, I noticed small footsteps trailing behind me. I turned, and there was Sophie, her birthday dress slightly rumpled, her face set with a seriousness that did not belong to a child of 9. She looked back toward the living room, making sure no one followed, before stepping close and whispering, "Grandpa," she said, her voice trembling. "I have to tell you something important." My heart pounded as I knelt to her level, reading the fear in her eyes. She bit her lip, leaned in, and whispered words that would change everything. "Mom and Dad are planning to steal your money tonight." For a moment, the hallway seemed to tilt beneath me. My hands found the doorframe, steadying myself as her words sank in. I looked into Sophie's eyes, those wide and frightened eyes that reminded me so much of Margaret's when she needed me to take her seriously. This was not a child's misunderstanding. Sophie had overheard something that should never have reached her ears. I crouched lower, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "What do you mean, sweetheart? What exactly did you hear?" Her small fingers twisted the hem of her dress as she whispered quickly, like someone afraid of being caught. "Last night I couldn't sleep. I heard Mom and Dad in the kitchen. Mom said you had too much money for an old man to live alone. She said they were going to fix that tonight." Dad kept asking, "What if you found out?" But Mom said it would be too late by then. They talked about some papers from the bank papers. Mrs. Caldwell's words from the plaza came back to me instantly. Brian and Clara carrying documents out of First National Bank just days ago. My stomach clenched. Clara was bold enough to whisper about my money within earshot of her daughter, confident that Brian would follow. Margaret had been right. A weak man with a stronger voice in his ear will always drift toward disaster. And now my granddaughter was the one carrying the weight of their betrayal. I pulled Sophie into my arms, feeling her small body tremble against mine. "You were very brave to tell me this," I murmured into her hair. "But we need to keep it between us for now. Can you do that?" She nodded quickly, though her eyes were shining with tears. "Grandpa, I don't want them to take your money. You're the only one who listens to me." The words hit me harder than any betrayal ever could. Clara had wrapped her hooks around Brian, but Sophie still trusted me. That trust was something I would not let her parents destroy. I brushed the tears from her cheek and gave her a smile I hoped carried the certainty she needed. "Nothing they do will ever change how much I love you. Do you understand?" She nodded again, her face softening with relief. "Will you stop them?" she asked in a whisper. I met her gaze, letting her see the resolve in my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, I will handle everything. But for now, we must go back to the party and act normal. Can you be brave for me?" Her little chin lifted with determination that made me ache with pride. "I can try." We walked back together, hand in hand, into the noise of laughter and clinking glasses. The party felt different now. Every balloon and decoration tainted by the knowledge of what Brian and Clara were planning. I watched Brian across the room, laughing too loudly at something Mike said, his eyes flicking toward me with false warmth. Clara hovered by the buffet table, checking on me with a careful glance that tried to read whether her act was working. Now I understood why they had been performing so relentlessly. They were softening me up, preparing me for the moment the papers appeared and the trap was sprung. I played my role well for the rest of the afternoon, smiling at neighbors, thanking Clara for the food, and praising Sophie for being such a thoughtful birthday girl. Inside, though, my chest burned with betrayal. Every generous act of the past 3 years now looked like a calculated test, a conditioning of my willingness to give until I gave everything. But I knew something Brian and Clara did not. I had not built my life by being blind. I had built it by watching closely, listening carefully, and acting decisively when the time was right. As the last of the guests began collecting coats and saying goodbyes, Brian caught my arm. His voice was soft but urgent. "Dad, don't leave yet. Remember, we wanted to talk after everyone's gone." Clara joined him immediately, her hand slipping onto my shoulder. "Yes, Edward. We planned something important. Just a little time tonight, then everything will be settled." I smiled faintly and rubbed my temple. "I'm afraid I'm not feeling well. This headache has been growing all afternoon. I think I should head home." Their reaction was telling. Brian's face paled, and Clara's grip tightened slightly, as if she could hold me there with her hand alone. "But Dad," Brian said quickly, "it will not take long. It is about family matters. Very important ones." Clara's voice sharpened just enough to betray her panic. "Edward, we have been preparing for weeks. Tonight is the night I kept my expression tired and apologetic. It can wait until tomorrow. Family isn't going anywhere." Without another word, I bent to hug Sophie, whispering into her ear where only she could hear me. "Everything will be all right." She hugged me tightly, clinging as if she feared I would not come back. My heart broke as I gently pried her arms from my neck, gave her one last smile, and turned for the door. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I saw Brian and Clara framed in the doorway behind me, whispering frantically to each other. They had planned tonight as the moment I would sign away my independence, and I had just unraveled their timeline with a simple refusal. Sliding into my Cadillac, I sat in their driveway for a moment, my hands gripping the wheel, my pulse steady now with something sharper than anger. This was not over, not by a long stretch. Sitting there in the dark, I realized they were not just after my money. They were after my freedom, and by tonight, I had to decide how to fight back. The drive home felt like traveling through a fog, my headlights cutting through shadows that seemed heavier than usual. I knew the battle was no longer about birthday gifts or strained conversations. Brian and Clara had been preparing something far more deliberate, and Sophie's whispered warning gave me the clarity I needed. They wanted legal control, and that meant paperwork. That meant signatures. That meant finding a way to make me look incapable of managing my own life. The house felt colder than it had that morning, every creak in the floorboards echoing with Margaret's words. I went straight to my office, the room where I had built my construction company from nothing more than a truck, a notebook, and stubborn determination. Behind her portrait on the wall sat my safe, its steel dial waiting for the familiar combination. 18, 19, 59. Margaret's birthday. I pulled the heavy door open and laid the folders across my desk, the evidence of 3 years of misplaced generosity. Mortgage payments, car loans, tuition checks, emergency transfers. 247 transactions in total, amounting to more than $65,000. Each request had been dressed as an emergency, each repayment promise never fulfilled. Looking at it all in one place, I finally saw the pattern. They had not been stumbling. They had been training me, conditioning me to accept their hands in my pockets until they reached for the whole wallet. I made careful notes, listing every payment and the excuse attached to it. Margaret's voice seemed to whisper over my shoulder, reminding me of the discipline that had made me successful. This was not just money. This was evidence, proof that their reliance had been deliberate. If they thought they could convince a court that I was incompetent, they would find themselves facing a man with records, dates, and signatures. I poured myself another coffee and dialed James Miller's private number. James had been vice president at Riverside Bank for years and an old friend from the days when my company's payroll had to be handled with precision. He answered with the same steady warmth I remembered. "Edward, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I leaned back in my chair, lowering my voice. "James, I need to ask you something unusual. Has anyone come into your bank recently asking about conservatorship or power of attorney procedures for an elderly family member?" There was a pause on the other end. Then James cleared his throat. "Funny you should ask. Just last week, a couple came in. Very prepared, asked specific questions about guardianship and emergency court orders. They knew more legal terminology than most attorneys." My grip on the phone tightened. "And who were they?" James hesitated. "Confidentiality limits what I can confirm. But let's just say if I were you, I would be cautious. They mentioned timelines for declaring someone mentally incompetent." I closed my eyes. The picture is clear as day. Clara had been rehearsing this play for months, guiding Brian step by step. And the documents they carried on Tuesday were the instruments meant to carve my freedom out from under me. After I hung up, I wasted no time. My next call was to Catherine Davis, a notary who had handled contracts for my business years ago. She was independent, discreet, and loyal only to the truth. "Catherine," I said when she picked up, "I have a sensitive family matter. Could you come to my house tomorrow morning at 10? Bring your seal and your journal. I need professional witnesses." Her voice was calm, dependable. "Of course, Edward. I will be there with those 2 calls." The skeleton of a plan formed. If Brian and Clara wanted me to sign papers that stripped me of control, I would let them bring those papers. But this time, they would not face the tired old man they believed I had become. They would face a banker who knew their questions, a notary who would see their manipulation, and a father who had finally decided enough was enough. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang again, Brian's name glowing on the screen. I answered with a weary voice, slurring my words just slightly. "Hello, son." His tone carried forced concern. "Dad, we were worried about you leaving early. Are you feeling all right?" I sighed heavily. "Not really. My head has been pounding. Hard to think straight. Silence, then a quick response. That is not good. Maybe we should bring you to the doctor tomorrow. Mary and I could help you with the paperwork, make sure everything is in order." There it was. They were moving faster, tightening the noose. I let my voice trail weakly. Maybe that would be best. "Let's talk tomorrow." His relief was obvious. "Good. We will come by in the morning. You will not have to worry about a thing, Dad. We will take care of everything." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair, staring at Margaret's photograph. She had always known I carried my heart too close to Brian, forgiving mistakes that should have been lessons. But now I had Sophie's trust to protect, and I would not let that little girl down. I spread my notes across the desk one more time, committing every number to memory, and wrote down the order of events for tomorrow, like a general sketching his battlefield. By the time I set my pen down, I knew I was no longer the mark of their scheme. I was the man about to turn their perfect plan into their greatest mistake. The next morning, I deliberately moved slower than usual, shuffling through the house in an old cardigan Margaret used to tease me about. I left my hair slightly mussed, my face unshaven, and when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I almost looked like the frail man Clara wanted me to be. The performance had to be convincing. If Brian and Clara wanted evidence that I was weak and confused, I would give them just enough to draw them in. What they would not expect was that professional witnesses would be waiting to watch them tighten the noose around their own necks. At 9:45 sharp, Catherine Davis arrived, her leather notary bag hanging from her shoulder. She sat up quietly in my office, her calm presence giving me a sense of security. 10 minutes later, James Miller knocked on the door, carrying his banker's portfolio. "Edward," he said, his handshake firm. "I thought it best to bring the paperwork we discussed." "This should make things more interesting," I nodded, my eyes hardening with resolve. "Stay sharp, James. You're about to see something unusual." "Right on time?" Brian and Clara's car pulled into my driveway. Through the curtain, I watched Clara straighten her jacket, clutching a black leather case that looked far too professional for a casual family matter. Brian followed behind, his shoulders tense, but his face painted with an eager smile. When I opened the door, I forced my voice to tremble slightly. "Good morning." "Come in." Clara wasted no time. "Edward, we brought some papers that will make things easier for you. It's all perfectly legal. We can explain everything." Her eyes flickered past me, briefly catching the sight of Catherine's notary journal and James's portfolio on the desk. For just a second, I saw a crack in her mask. But then she recovered, smiling too brightly. How thoughtful, inviting professionals. That will make this official. I led them into the office and lowered myself into the chair with a deliberate sigh. Brian sat across from me, his knee bouncing nervously, while Clara opened her leather case with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind for weeks. She laid out the papers on the desk, sliding them toward me with a gentle hand. These documents will give Brian and me the ability to manage your banking, your bills, even your medical decisions. Think of it as having a safety net. I stared at the papers with wide eyes, feigning confusion. So many words. I used to understand things like this, but lately it all feels fuzzy. Clara leaned forward, her tone dripping with sympathy. That's why this is important. If you wait too long, it may be too late. We can take care of everything for you. Brian swallowed hard, glancing at Catherine and James. He knew something about this was not right, but Clara's hand on his arm silenced him. I picked up one of the papers, letting my hand tremble slightly as if the weight of the page was too much. This is a big decision, I muttered. Maybe I should think on it. Clara's mask faltered again. Edward, waiting will only make things harder. Don't you trust us? I met her gaze with tired eyes. Of course, your family. Then I set the papers down carefully. But I think I'd like to sleep on it. Perhaps tomorrow, when my head is clearer. The silence that followed was sharp. Brian shifted uncomfortably, while Clara forced a smile that barely hid her frustration. Fine, she said through clenched teeth. Tomorrow morning, then. We'll come back, and you'll sign everything. She gathered the documents briskly, slipping them back into her case. Thank you for trusting us, Edward. You'll see this is for the best after they left. The weight of the performance slid off my shoulders. My back straightened, my eyes sharpened, and I turned to Catherine and James, who had both been silent observers through the entire exchange. Catherine tapped her pen against her journal. They were pushing you hard. I've seen coercion before, but that was one of the more polished attempts. James nodded grimly. They've done their research. They knew exactly what to ask about at the bank. But what they don't know is that they just walked into your trap. I spread the papers they had left behind across the desk. Every line was highlighted for my signature, every clause carefully worded to transfer complete control of my finances, my property, even my healthcare decisions into their hands. Clara had invested in legal advice, but she had forgotten the most important lesson. No document stands without proper witnesses. Tomorrow, she thought she would secure my compliance. Instead, she would secure her own downfall. That night, I barely slept, but it was not from fear. I drafted new instructions for my estate, rewriting my will and setting aside a trust for Sophie that could not be touched until she was an adult. I outlined every payment I had made to Brian and Clara, labeling each one with dates and purposes. It was a ledger of generosity that had been twisted into dependence, and soon it would become the evidence of their betrayal. As dawn broke, I looked out at Margaret's rose garden, the buds just beginning to open. The scent carried on the morning breeze like her voice in my ear. Take care of Sophie, Edward. She's the one who matters, and I promised her again, silently, that I would. By the time the sun rose, I was no longer rehearsing weakness. I was sharpening the blade of the truth, ready to cut through every lie Brian and Clara had spun. At 10 o'clock sharp, the stage was set. Catherine sat quietly at the side of my office, her notary journal open, her pen ready. James arrived dressed in his usual dark suit, his portfolio resting on the desk like a silent authority. The air in the room carried a charged stillness, the kind I used to feel just before a deal was struck across a construction table. Only this time, the deal would not enrich my son. It would expose him. The knock came on time, loud and confident. When I opened the safe door, Clara entered first, her leather case clutched like a trophy she was about to claim. Brian followed with a smile too wide for comfort, his eyes darting nervously toward the office. They froze when they saw Catherine and James already inside. For a moment, I thought Clara's mask might crack entirely, but she recovered quickly with a rehearsed smile. "Edward, how thoughtful of you to arrange professional help. This will make everything official." We all settled into our seats. Brian took the chair opposite me, leaning forward with what he thought was earnest concern. Clara spread the documents across the desk, her manicured fingers brushing the highlighted sections. "These are the same forms we showed you yesterday," she said, her voice smooth. "Just some signatures, and all your worries will disappear." I leaned forward, this time without the trembling hands, without the weary tone. My voice was steady, sharp. "Before I sign anything, there's something you need to hear." Clara blinked, her smile faltering just slightly. Brian glanced at her, waiting for a cue. "Dad, what do you mean?" I straightened my back, meeting his eyes. "I know about your visit to the bank last Tuesday. I know you asked about guardianship procedures, about how to declare me mentally incompetent. I know these documents are nothing more than your attempt to take control of everything I've worked for." The silence in the room was like glass about to shatter. Brian's face drained of color. Clara, for once, did not have a polished response ready. James cleared his throat, speaking into the silence. "That is correct." They asked detailed questions at the bank. Questions most families never ask unless they intend to push legal control. Catherine set down her pen, her expression cold. "These signatures you're pressing for, if signed under the kind of pressure I just witnessed, would never stand." Clara tried to recover, her words sharper now. "Edward, you're confused. We were just trying to help. You've been forgetting things. Yesterday you admitted you couldn't think clearly." I let out a laugh, short and hard. "Yesterday I was performing. Today, you are seeing exactly who I am." I opened the drawer of my desk and laid out the folder I had prepared, pages of documentation showing every payment I had made over the past 3 years. $65,000, I said firmly. Mortgage payments, car repairs, tuition. 247 separate transactions. You've trained me to say yes, each time asking for more. And now you want the rest of it. But what you didn't count on was that I kept records of everything. Brian buried his face in his hands, but Clara leaned forward, desperate. "Those were family needs. We did what we had to do." My eyes hardened. "No, Clara. Families don't plot conservatorship. Families don't scheme to strip a man of his freedom so they can raid his accounts. That isn't family, it's theft." James shifted in his chair, his voice heavy with authority. "Edward, these documents they brought, if you had signed them, they would have had control over every financial and medical decision you faced. Complete control. That is no act of care. That is a takeover." Catherine closed her journal with a sharp snap. "And I can tell you now, I will not notarize fraud." The color drained from Clara's cheeks. She had lost the room. Brian looked at me, his face pale and broken, his voice little more than a whisper. "Dad, what happens now?" I stood, feeling every year of my age, but also every ounce of strength that had built the life they tried to steal. My voice was steady, decisive. What happens now is consequences. Their perfect plan had collapsed before their eyes, but I was only beginning to show them what real justice looked like. I placed a new set of documents on the desk, the ink still fresh from the night before. "This," I said, sliding the first page toward Catherine, "is my new will. My estate, my properties, and my savings will go into a trust for Sophie. She will receive it when she is 21 to pay for her education and her future. Not 1 cent of it will pass through your hands." Brian lifted his head slowly, his eyes hollow, his lips trembling. "Dad, please. You can't do this. I know we made mistakes, but we're family. We can fix this." Clara's voice cracked, her mask completely gone now. "Edward, you're going to cut us out? After everything we've done for you?" My gaze hardened. "Done for me? You mean the countless requests for money dressed up as emergencies? You mean the whispers about assisted living while you circled my house like vultures? Or maybe you mean the legal consultations about how to declare me unfit? That's not family. That's betrayal." Catherine examined the new will carefully, her notary seal pressed against the page with finality. James added his signature as a witness, his tone quiet but firm. "Edward, this is solid. She'll be protected. They can't touch a dime." I looked directly at Brian. "The trust will provide for her college education, even graduate school if she chooses. Veterinary school, law school, anything. If she dreams of starting a business, she'll have the funds to begin. But the two of you will not see a cent. You've proven you care more about money than your daughter's peace of mind." Brian's shoulders sagged, as if the fight had drained out of him completely. He muttered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." Clara, however, said nothing. She simply clenched her jaw, her eyes flashing with the cold calculation of a woman already trying to think of her next move. I took no comfort from Brian's apology, but I left him with one final chance. If you want me to ever reconsider, you will need to show me real change. Get a job that supports your family, pay your own bills. Put Sophie's happiness above your greed. Until then, you have no place in my plans." The house fell into an uneasy silence once Catherine and James departed, leaving the three of us behind. Clara stared at the floor, her hands gripping the arms of her chair until her knuckles turned pale. Brian just sat there, broken, his eyes refusing to meet mine. I gathered the notarized papers and locked them back into my safe, the click of the steel door echoing like a judge's gavel. The matter was sealed. Later that evening, a gentle knock came at my door. Sophie stood there with her backpack still slung over one shoulder, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Grandpa," she whispered, "Mommy said you wanted to see me." I invited her inside, my heart softening at the sight of her innocence still intact despite the shadows she carried. We sat together on the couch, and I spoke gently. "Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups make bad choices. Your mom and dad made some mistakes about money, and there have to be consequences. But none of this changes how much I love you." Her little hands clutched mine tightly. "Are they in trouble?" I smiled faintly. "They need to learn how to take care of themselves and you. But I want you to know something important. Your future is safe. I've made arrangements so you can go to any college you want. Veterinary school, art school, anything. You'll always have what you need." Her eyes lit up, her voice trembling with a kind of hope I had not heard from her all day. "Even veterinary school?" That's really expensive, I chuckled softly, especially veterinary school. And if one day you change your mind and want to be an engineer or a teacher, you'll have money for that too. She threw her arms around me, hugging with the kind of pure love that reminded me of Margaret's embrace. In that moment, I felt the weight of generations, the promises of the past, the betrayal of the present, and the hope of the future settle firmly on my shoulders. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, I walked with Sophie to the backyard where Margaret's roses were beginning to bloom. The soft pink petals swayed in the breeze, carrying her memory with them. Sophie knelt beside one of the bushes and whispered, "Grandma would be happy, wouldn't she?" My throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. She would be proud of you. She'd be proud of us both." I knew then that I had kept my promise. I had protected Sophie, just as Margaret had asked me to. The trust was secured, the truth was exposed, and the future was safe. Brian and Clara had tried to steal my freedom and my fortune, but in the end, all they had done was destroy their own credibility. As Sophie leaned against me, her small hand gripping mine, I realized justice had not just been about money. It had been about showing her that love is stronger than greed, and that a man's legacy is not measured by what is stolen from him, but by what he protects for those who truly deserve it. And with that thought, I closed the chapter on betrayal and opened a new one with Sophie by my side. Margaret's roses bloomed quietly in the garden, a reminder that no matter how harsh the winter, some things will always grow back stronger. If you liked this story, please subscribe and tell us your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next one, click on the box on the screen.